going to kind of step back now and pick up really what's the most exciting part of, or continue the exciting activities of the day. I won't say the most exciting. It's incredible to hear from our sister from the land of the condor talking about her struggles and her people's struggles and their efforts to defend the rights of Mother Earth. Yeah, it's time for indigenous solutions. I think we should. In my remarks, I'd like to make 7 seems like a good number, and I think I can do this fairly quickly. I'd like to make 7 basic points that I think would be useful for us to consider as we move on to try to transition to thinking about indigenous solutions to all of these issues we're talking about. And let me begin with, I think, and I will always cite the elders who've shared wisdom with me. I think the first place that we speak from, and it's a place of power. It's not economic power. It's not political power. It's not legal jurisdictional power. It is a power of spirit. I always remember what Dr. Henrietta Mann said, a Southern Cheyenne woman who spent most of her life with the Northern Cheyenne. She told students in a classroom right here at Haskell Indian Nations University about 15 years ago when she was a visiting teacher. She said, here's what's different about us when we enter into the discussions about land, water, air, and the sacredness of that. She says, we're born spiritual beings. We know that. What are we struggling with? We are struggling to find out how to be competent human beings. Our spirituality is off the table. There's no negotiation about that. There's no, way to mitigate those concerns we are going to bring forward. That's where we speak from, right, Billy? That's where we speak from. We speak from the heart. We speak from the spirit. And here's what's beautiful about that. And this would be my second point. One of our great intellectual, he's been brought up in several contexts. I think Steve brought him up. But one of my good friends and mentors, Vine Deloria Jr., like to talk about power and place produces personality. As we move forward with the discussion and we think about what we can do, let's play to our strength. What is our strength? Our spiritual center, who we are as indigenous peoples. Let's play to our strength, and that is that our power resides in the landscapes and seascapes that we call home. The powers, the forces, the relationships that shape who we have become as unique human beings. Power and place. Keith Basso is right in his landmark work on White Mountain Apache language and storytelling. Wisdom sits in places. Let's grab that. Robert's presentation yesterday, Chief Justice Robert Yazzi's presentation spoke so eloquently to that from a Dene tradition. And here's the beauty in this. It brings me to point 3. The beauty in this is as we move forward, think about this. We can disabuse modern mankind of the most miseducative dichotomy that operates in the modern world. And that's the dichotomy between nature and culture. Because everyone in this room has spoken in their own way to the power of place and the beauty of the fact that our unique tribal identities are expressions of those homelands, those unique homelands that gave us our identities, where our Creator gave us those stories of our emergence, where we learned, we're given songs, we're given ceremony. And our cultures reflected that. Let's say, as one part of rights of Mother Earth, what we might commit ourselves to, I'm just suggesting, Let's disabuse people of the notion that they can talk about biological diversity over here and ecological diversity and never mention cultural diversity. They must acknowledge the cultural diversity that has given us our unique tribal and indigenous identities. That would be a step forward. What do we recognize? Well, we recognize this. This would be what? Point 3. That we, as we think about indigenous solutions, as we think about rights of Mother Earth, we are talking about the construction of a reinterpretation, a renewal of old ways, old traditions, the application of knowledge, practical knowledge and wisdom that resided in those traditions, in those places, into the world we live in today. We're not talking about going back. We're not fixated on where we're going to be in the future, as if we're running to catch up with something. That's another thought system, a linear, chronological timeline. If we can acknowledge that we as human beings are bound up in this symbiotic nature-culture nexus, we have an incredible opportunity, and I've heard it spoken to 3, 4, 5 times in breakout groups by presenters. And what is that? Let's situate rights of Mother Earth in a discussion of moral ecology, a spiritual ecology, an ecology that includes human communities bound up in these unique environments and ecosystems. We will not separate ourselves from it. To do so would mean to lose the unique character that makes us Anishinaabe, that makes us Dene, that makes us Apache, that makes us Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Miccosukee, Seminole, Lummi, all of our Northwest Coast relatives. They have such unique knowledge about those coastal estuaries, the salmon, the killer whale. They didn't learn that out of a textbook, did you, Billy? No, they learned it by being out on the water, on the rivers. Point 4. Let's honor a spiritual and a moral, ecological sense of community where we acknowledge we're one small part of it. And we can begin to learn useful things about how to become competent human beings from the other life that we share this planet with. We have sold ourselves short because we've spent the last 200 years, maybe longer, but certainly the last 200 years, all we do is look in the mirror at ourselves and our creations, and we think we're building something called progress, and we're building something called destruction. Point 5. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. There's work for everyone here. I don't care if you're a teacher, if you're a daycare provider, if you're a linguist, if you're an indigenous Dene scholar. I don't care if you're selling used cars. There's work for everyone to do, because here's what I heard today. Think of the institution of law. I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know how far we get in terms of addressing rights in the kind of legal, rational, constructed system that we're immersed in. I don't know. But I bet we've got some good attorneys who are ready to jump in and say, how can we nudge that? Where can we find the opportunities? I do know this. Let's move forward with a notion that if someone wants to talk about inalienable rights, we will affirm as First Nations peoples, as Native peoples, as Indigenous peoples, we recognize inalienable responsibilities, and we will not walk away from those. We will not walk away from inalienable responsibilities. Think of economics. I know why we talk about resources, because people are after our water. They're after our forest. They're after our lands. But I don't want to talk about resources. I think we should invoke a new form of discourse, as our good elder and friend, the late, I almost said the late. Boy, Orrin, I hope you're not watching this. Orrin's very alive and well. Orrin Lyons. Orrin said at the 25th anniversary of Earth Day something very interesting. He said, be careful about the words you use. What did he say? He says, we don't have a word for resources. He says, when we talk about the trees, when we talk about the deer, when we talk about the land, when we talk about all of this other than human life that surrounds us, we talk about relatives. And we talk about relationships. Let's start today a discourse about living well and responsibly and respectfully with relatives, in relationships. We move from rights to responsibilities. We move from resources to relatives. And we don't want to talk about reproduction of the existing economic system. We want to talk about resilience of new systems, the restoration of indigenous systems where people understood we are one small part of this complex web of life. I don't call that romanticism. I call that indigenous realism. Let's invoke it. Education. Okay, I know we've gained a lot of knowledge through the controlled experimental setting. I acknowledge that. That's one way of knowing. There's another way of knowing. And it's deep, spatially shaped experiential learning. As we think about how we're going to prepare engineers, yes, we need engineers. I'm going to tell you we need engineers just as much as we need attorneys. We need doctors just as much as we need social workers. But let's make a commitment to use our tribal colleges and universities to begin to create systems of education where we don't reproduce systems that make students think the only way they can learn something and know something is through a controlled experiment. The world isn't like that. Number 6. So that's point 5. The institutions we're in, let's face it, we are in the belly of the beast. That doesn't mean we don't have opportunities to make change. Let's do it. Let's move that direction. Law, economics, politics, education. Let's push it. It is worth noting, isn't it? It is worth noting. Billy, Kalani, Dennis, all of you in here who've been on the ground, Tom, Robert, there's something very interesting, and I think we should acknowledge it, and I think we should run with it. After all the struggles we've had, and a lot of you have been in the front lines a lot longer than I have, but after all the struggles we've had to have acknowledgement that traditional ecological knowledge has an empirical basis and can be documented by people who have that experience on the ground, on the water. Isn't it interesting that today NASA, NOAA, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, the National Renewable Energy Labs want to talk to Native people? Yeah, they want to talk to us. I don't think we should step back from that invitation. I think we should go there and we should ask them, we talk, you listen. Point 6, people sometimes will tell me, oh, you're advocating, you're against progress, aren't you? No, I'm not against progress. Well, maybe I am. If you're going to define progress as we're going to measure improvement on the planet through human eyes only, through our value system, and that progress is making life more convenient, comfortable, and easy for us at the expense of the rest of life we share the planet with, then I would suggest, yeah, maybe I'm not that hot on progress. But you got to be for something, and I'm for something. And you are too, from what I've heard. I've heard Billy talk about this. I've heard Tom talk about this. I've heard Kalani, I've heard Dennis, I've heard Chaz talk about this. I've heard many of you in this room talk about this. What are we asking? What are we asking to be acknowledged and recognized? What we are for is building systems of life enhancement. Not just for ourselves, but for all of the life we share. Not on some abstract notion of nature, but on those big lakes on the north, on these grasslands of Middle America, on those coastal estuaries, and that those brothers and sisters out there in those Pacific islands have built. I'm for systems of life enhancement. I think we should think about how we can advance that, and we can do it legally. We can use the law. We can use economics. We can use politics. We can use education. There's work for everyone. Billy Frank. I was at a meeting where Billy Frank spoke. I remember, he doesn't remember when he said this. I don't know if he does. We were at the National Center for Atmospheric Research about 3-4 years ago, and we did a discussion on 7 generations learning about the future and climate change, what that meant. And Billy gave a call out, and I'm just going to repeat it because I think it's beautiful. He said, I'm looking for volunteers. Do I have any volunteers in here? And kind of people were kind of going like, well, He said, oh, wait a second here. I don't want volunteers today. I don't want volunteers next week. I'm looking for lifetime volunteers. Do we have some lifetime volunteers in here? I know we do. I've seen you guys in action. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's work for everyone to do. We just have to come together. Let's be honest. Let's be respectful. Let's work together. Let's find out where we have opportunities for agreement to move forward. What's beautiful about this? This will be my last point. And this is what a student in one of my classes said. I wish I could remember the student. And it kind of mirrors the discussion we've been having in some ways, I think, Tom. I think, we get into this issue of people are worried about if we adopt some kind of universal system or some formalized system, is it going to be flexible enough and agile enough, though, to respect my Zoyaha ways? Because they're different from Anishinaabe ways. And Dene ways are different from Anishinaabe ways. Why? Because we're people of place. Because what we do and how we express our unique identity is a function of that relationship that gives us our unique personality. And here's what the Haskell student said, and I think it's ingenious. What she said is, because we're talking about indigenous philosophy. Is there such a thing as indigenous philosophy, or do we have to talk about indigenous philosophies? The general versus the particular. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. A general framework for talking about rights of Mother Earth, but is it going to be resilient and agile and flexible enough to recognize that the Makah traditions and where they live are very different than those people who are living in the Great Plains? They should be different. The student said, Dr. Wildcat, I've got the answer. I know the answer. I said, okay, what are you? And she said it, and everyone just laughed and smiled because we all knew what she meant. And it's a fundamental contradiction in Western thinking. What that young lady said in my class, she says, Dr. Wildcat, I know the answer. We're all the same. We're different. I love it. We're all the same. We're different. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. We have an opportunity to do something today, guys. Let's get together. Let's put our minds together and let's think of next steps. Let's think of ways that we can advance rights of Mother Earth, that we can talk about, resiliency. And let's play to our strength. I know we're going to have battles with the legal system. I know we're going to have battles with state departments, with natural resource departments. But I don't think we should lose the high ground. I think we should keep articulating this deep, spatially bound wisdom. We've been given incredible gifts. And I think that's another thing to call on. Chaz Wheelock and I don't know if Chaz is in here, but Chaz and I were at a meeting at Wingspread, I don't know, it was a year ago maybe it's just a year ago. And I know some of you have heard our Haudenosaunee relatives do their condolences when they do prayers. They give they give thanks. It's a beautiful tradition. And I remember that one of our hosts asked one of our Haudenosaunee relatives said, "Would you do a prayer?" And he said, "How long do you have?" It was great. He said, "How long do you have?" And he said, "Oh, well, how long does it take?" He says, "Well, it takes a long time to give thanks. It takes a long time to give thanks." And he said, "Well, could you do a 10-minute version?" And I love Chaz, what the elder said. He goes like, "What part of creation do you want me to leave out?" Thank you all for coming to Haskell Indian Nations University. You've honored us. You've honored us. We're glad to be here. Glad to work finally with Tom. Glad to work with Pachamama. Think of where we're sitting. Think of what opportunities we have in this discussion now that we're going to move forward. And we have responsibilities to those who came before us, who faced corporal punishment, who were denied food. We used to have a little jailhouse not 100 yards south of here, where students who violated the rule to not speak their native language would be incarcerated overnight and denied meals. Look at where we are, and we're going to have this discussion now. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's get to work. Thank you, all of my relations, all of my relatives. Thank you.